Joe, unfortunately, for folks like us who are used to following U.S. politics, we're not going to get the results of the first round vote. We're not going to get exit polling to see which Cardinals from which geographic areas are rallying behind certain candidates. But take us through the process, the very secretive process of this voting that we have seen underway that ultimately leads to this smoke. Now, about 2 hours later than maybe we first expected it. That was supposed to be around 1 p.m. when we were told we could first expect to see some smoke. It's now 3 p.m. on the East Coast here in the United States. But what is the process like that these Cardinals just undertook?
Yeah, and if you've been watching Scripps News throughout the afternoon, you've seen that little bug in the corner of the chimney. And the original guidance we were given was between 1 and 2. Obviously, it's not between 1 and 2 when we're seeing this black smoke. And I think that perhaps speaks volumes to the fact this is the largest conclave ever. We've never had 133 cardinals, so everything takes a little bit longer, calling individual cardinals up to put their ballot in the chalice in which it is counted. It takes longer to count 133 ballots as opposed to conclaves of previous years in 2013 and in 2005. I think it best describe what happens is perhaps what happens next. The Cardinals are sequestered, but they do have a staff that caters to them for dinner tonight. It's generally very simple meals. They're not eating fancy cuisine that you would get in restaurants around Rome. It's prepared in many cases by sisters, by brothers, by priests, and that's by design. You know, there was this sense in the 13th century when the conclave lasted nearly 2 years that the cardinals were just enjoying themselves too much. The wine was too good. The food was too good. Make it a little more uncomfortable, and that's part of this sequestered process. Uncomfortable so that a decision, it doesn't drag on for days or for weeks or for months, or in the case of the 13th century, for years. But tonight is when the Cardinals, well, they'll huddle up. That's permissible here. They'll huddle up. In Casa Santa Marta, where they're staying, they will get in groups. No doubt some of the Americans will get together. No doubt some of the Cardinals from Africa will get together, from Europe, and they'll talk a little bit of strategy, and they'll talk a little bit about who they really like. Maybe the outcome. They know the outcome of the vote because it's tallied in front of them. So maybe a name surprised them more so than others. And that is where you have perhaps the influence of the American delegation. There are 10 American Cardinals participating in this vote. The expectation is that no American will be elected Pope at this conclave, but 10 American Cardinals, that's a pretty powerful voting block when you're talking 133 individuals gathered. Again, the headline, though, at this hour, Andrew, black smoke, we will do this again tomorrow.
Yeah, and Joe, what are some of those big issues that are facing the Catholic Church that are sort of driving the conversation and the decision-making of the Cardinals as they begin their voting? What are some of the big things that the Catholic Church is facing and that they are hoping to deal with this next pontiff going forward?
It depends on what region of the world you're in. If you're talking about the church in the United States, where there's north of 60 million Americans who identify as Catholic, still recovering from the sex abuse scandal is still a big issue, in which you have Americans who maybe were baptized and went through Catholic school, but the entire scandal turned them off and they've never returned to the church. That remains an issue. In other parts of the church, financial management is a big issue. The Cardinals spent a lot of time between the death of Pope Francis and the beginning of this conclave discussing that issue amongst themselves. Remember, the Cardinals met amongst themselves every single day during the time between Pope Francis's passing and day one of the conclave. But the church is so massive. They're also dealing with issues on the continent of Africa. The church is growing on the continent of Africa. And on the continent of Africa, the church is known as being more conservative. Remember, there are countries in Africa where still gay marriage is illegal. There are cardinals in Africa that are facing the threat of terrorism in ways that cardinals from the United States do not face. And then there's the issue of China. You know, the Vatican, the Holy See, is one of 12 governments on this planet that recognize Taiwan. China doesn't like that too much. And the church has had a contentious relationship at times with the Chinese government over appointing bishops, leaders in China. And that is an issue facing the church going forward. But I hate to say that there's too much division happening. I think if we are at this time tomorrow, Andrew, on the air and talking about after 5 rounds of voting, still no pontiff, that is when we can talk about maybe some division in the conclave. It's very typical after round 1 to just see black smoke.
Yeah. And Joe, before we let you go, I just want to know, what is it like to be in Rome right now? Of course, this is something that hasn't happened since 2013, and before that, it was even longer. So what is the sort of energy and sort of feeling, the overall vibe right now as this conclave is now officially underway?
There is a sense of history here, and I'm glad you brought that up, because unlike American presidential elections, which we use for comparison's sake, but it's very different processes, obviously, that's every 4 years. We don't know when the next conclave will be. You know, there are cardinals that are mentioned as being favorites to be pope who are in their late 50s, early 60s, and they could live, if they're elected, for 30, 35 years. I mean, we may not have another election for decades here. So there is this sense of witnessing history. We've been watching some of the Italian media in between our coverage breaks here on Scripps News. They reported in the square of St. Peter's, 45,000 people gathered today just to see this black smoke that we watched in real time here on Scripps News. That's a lot of people for just day 1 of this, when everyone in the media was telling them don't expect a pope on day 1. So you definitely get a sense of all of this transpiring, history in the making. And it's worth reminding our viewers here on Scripps News again what happens when we get that white smoke, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's Friday. Usually there's a period of about 45 minutes to an hour after the white smoke appears until we know the name of the cardinal and the name of the pope. A lot of things happen behind the scenes once that white smoke emerges. First off, the cardinal that's won the election is asked, do you accept the results? They say yes. And then the cardinal's asked, the new Holy Father is asked, what name do they choose? And that's often in honor of a saint or a pope. They are ushered away at that point into the room of tears, which is where white cassocks await them. They'll pick the cassock that fits them the best. There's an opportunity for private prayer, a blessing of the cardinals, and then they will emerge after Habemus Papam is declared on the balcony of St. Peter's. But one thing we know on this day 1 of the conclave is that will not happen tonight. We've had black smoke, and that is expected to be the only voting that takes place on day 1. The cardinals are now expected to retire for dinner, for break, for prayer, for relaxation, and yes, to talk about who the next pope should be.
All right, Joe St. George for us in Rome. Joe, you have had a long day, and tomorrow, it seems, could potentially be a big day and a historic day. I think we're going to see smoke potentially 4 times. That's when they are set to vote. So, Joe, thank you for that. And coming up, after we say goodbye to Joe, we are going to have a leading theological scholar to talk about what is going on in the conclave, some of the bigger issues facing the Catholic Church, and what we can expect on day 2. That's all coming up after a short break.
You're watching Scripps News, part of the Scripps News Group.
Well, the process is now very much underway at the Vatican. 133 cardinals voting for a new pontiff, and you saw it here just a moment ago. That black smoke means no new pope tonight, but these cardinals are going to be back at it tomorrow for what could potentially be 4 more votes and potentially a new head of the Catholic Church. For more analysis, we are joined now by Kevin Hughes. He's the chairperson of Theology and Religious Studies at Villanova University. Kevin, thank you for joining us. And first of all, you know, it just happened a few moments ago. Your reaction to that black smoke, a lot of people going in said it was unlikely to get a pope on the first day, but any surprises from your perspective?
No surprises from my perspective. I think that the conventional wisdom is that the first vote is really a sense for the Cardinals to get a sense for who's still on the table, as it were, who is still being considered, what's the lay of the land, who's voting for whom, how many viable candidates do we have. So I think, as I said, most people think that the first vote is usually just a way to test the waters, and I think that's what we've seen.
And so take us through what happens now. Do we expect some of these cardinals to hold smaller groups where they have some discussions based on how things shook out in that first round of voting, or do people just kind of put it on pause till the morning? Is there some sort of behind the scenes, tasteful campaigning that we see some of these top cardinals who might be in the running start to do tonight?
You know, it's a really good question. And of course, conversations will happen. It's important to understand that there's no formal program in terms of, the speaking that is going to happen already happened before they went into conclave and closed the doors, where particular cardinals or bishops gave speeches and addressed the issues of the time and what we're looking for. That's already happened. So really what we're looking at now is the cardinals will retire to their places of residence there in the Casa San Marta, and I'm sure there will be conversations, but the formal conversation is done. There'll be discussions back and forth, but really the way the Cardinals like to present it and the way they like to think about it is that this is a time for prayerful reflection.
Last time this happened was back in 2013. Some of the big issues facing the church then were how to move forward after the sex abuse scandals, I think acceptance of some of those different groups who had traditionally been alienated by the Catholic Church, which pontiff represents a geographic area where the church is growing. Is it similar this time around, or are there some other big issues that have emerged over the past decade that you think could really be driving this election?
I think that one way of thinking about this conclave is that this is a consideration of what the long-term legacy of Pope Francis will be. Pope Francis, maybe to the surprise of some, was a bit revolutionary, at least in his approach to things. He didn't change any major doctrines or anything, but in terms of his stance and approach to the way the church should be in a contemporary world, it was a big change, and a lot of people felt excited about that, and some people were not so crazy about that. And there was a lot of talk before the conclave closed about what that legacy will be. Will this synodality approach that Pope Francis really championed in the latter part of his papacy, will that have a life, and will it continue? Will the next pope extend the international face of the church and be from someplace other, or is it time to come back to Italy? Are we going to have another Italian pope as a way of kind of saying, well, let's hold this, hold the line here, at least in a moderate way? So I think that question of Pope Francis's legacy is the major issue that is really the sorting point for us.
Yeah, and we know traditionally, as you hit on, the Pope has been from Europe. Francis, a departure from that. But what does it signal to specific parts of the world if we were to choose a Pope from, or the Cardinals, choose a Pope from Africa, from Asia? What sort of symbolism and sort of acknowledgement of the future of the Catholic Church would that have?
I think it would be a tremendous reflection of what the church has already become, and that's important to say. The diversity among the cardinals already represented within the Sistine Chapel as they sit in conclave is already the richest, most widely spread and ethnically and nationally and globally diverse crowd of cardinals that we've ever had. And so whatever choice they make, they're making a choice as a global body. And if the choice that they make is a larger, is a base from a different part of the world, that'll have a significant impact on how the church is seen.
All right, Kevin Hughes of Villanova University. Kevin, thank you for those insights.